Sharon is my colleague here at OCLC, and I'm going to have Sharon welcome our presenters for today. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you. You are recording, and are you giving me the ball?
Sure.
Okay, great. And actually, what I'd like to do, and hello everyone, I see people are still streaming into the room, but we'll go ahead and get started. I want to introduce the Coalition to Advance Learning in Archives, Libraries, and Museums. This two-part webinar series, starting today, is a pilot project from the Coalition. The Coalition formed in October of 2013. And the idea was to bring together organizations that are invested in continuing education and professional development for the workforce of archives, libraries, and museums, and to collectively produce new strategies for effective staff learning programs. The Coalition is actively working on identifying new opportunities for how organizations can collaborate to ensure well-coordinated, sustainable, and effective continuing education and professional development for all of us working in the archives, libraries, and museums fields. And a little more background. This initiative is made possible with funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. OCLC serves in the role of project sponsor and also volunteered its WebJunction platform and staff to produce this webinar series. There are 22 formal members of the Coalition who represent organizations that serve either archives, libraries, or museums, or a combination or all of the above. Their acronyms are listed on this slide, and you can find a lot more information about these organizations and the Coalition itself on the Coalition's very new website, which can be found at coalitiontoadvancelearning.org. And as Jennifer mentioned in the tech introduction, Twitterers among you can follow the Coalition at LAM Coalition, that's L-A-M Coalition. So beyond tweeting about this webinar today, you can also use that tweet to follow the other activities of the Coalition. So while formulating its joint strategy, Coalition members have divided into 3 working groups to delve into specific areas of investigation, organization, and experimentation around continuing education and professional development. So this project management series is the product of one of those working groups that wanted to prototype a process for how multiple organizations could coordinate and collaborate to produce a learning event that has broad appeal across the field. This group worked together to choose the topic, pull together the curriculum and resources, create the slides and worksheets, design the registration form and surveys, market the event, and moderate the sessions. So we want to thank you for joining us in this prototype and also for being willing to share your candid feedback with us so that we and the Coalition can learn from the experience. So we had more than 1,000 people register for today's session. And looking at the registration data earlier this week, we were pleased to see that we have a solid representation from across all 3 sectors of the field. So I think we can say that our assumption that a course on project planning would have a broad appeal was indeed verified by this turnout. So those of you who are doing the math quickly right now will notice that the percentage totals more than 100%, and this is because 18% of you identified with more than one of the 3 sectors. And there are also 14% who don't work in a library or an archives or a museum, but for those institutions or in another related area. And also the registration showed that all 50 states and District of Columbia are represented, and we also have quite a number of people joining from Canada and some from outside North America. So with such a wide range of people in the room today, we hope that you will make good use of the chat window, and you will use that to meet one another, share your thoughts about what we'll be learning today. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Bob and Sarah, our presenters today, both joining us from IMLS.
Oh, thank you, Sharon. I'm going to make sure we can advance the slides. Yes, thank you. So thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Jennifer, for setting us up, and welcome everyone to our presentation today on Project Management 101, Key Elements of a Project Plan. We confess that we were a bit astounded, actually daunted by the number of registrations and the number of participants today. And you can probably see the number of attendees displayed on your screen, and you can think of that as vital signs in a critical care facility because our blood pressure and adrenaline are going up and down with every bit of the number. So we are a bit daunted, but nevertheless we'll go on. We're also daunted especially by the long list of concerns and questions you all noted when you registered. That spreadsheet is available, and I urge you to take a look at it because it's compelling proof, as Sharon mentioned, that the coalition was right to see that project management was a concern to all three professions. There's a lot we need to know, a lot we want to know, and so this is a very good start for us. Today, though, we are only dipping our toes in the water. We're going to look at project planning and the elements of a good project plan. All of this is going to be based on real-world examples, projects we've done, but especially projects we see, Sarah and I, we see and evaluate at the IMLS. Every year, we read hundreds of applications. We just received 150 this week in our National Leadership Grant cycle. So all of those are basically project plans. We then follow and monitor the funded applications as they implement those plans. So we have a very good idea of what types of plan work and a very good idea of what types of plans attract support and funding, what makes those ideas compelling. And we'll use that knowledge and experience today in the presentation. At various points, we'll ask you to chime in using the chat box. Be kind. But for the most part, we'll be doing a very straightforward presentation in a very informal style. There will be more opportunities between now and the next webinar and during the next webinar for you all to participate.
Hi, everybody. This is Sarah. I'd just like to reiterate we're so excited to have you all here. We even saw we have some international participants, so that's pretty cool for us. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what the Coalition hopes to get out of this webinar. On top of providing you with some introductory information on project planning, the Coalition has some bigger goals. As Bob and Sharon both mentioned, the Coalition is investigating how to create content that can benefit all three sectors, libraries, archives, and museums. And with that in mind, we would also like to explore ways of easing and encouraging cross-sector collaboration, getting all of you to kind of talk about our similarities. It's our hope that during today's webinar, you'll use the chat box and Twitter to exchange ideas with each other and to help each other with strategies. Definitely take a look at the spreadsheet. It'll give you an idea of all the different things that you are all concerned with. We can't emphasize enough to you that this course is a prototype. We are testing both the content as well as methods for delivery, which includes this online format and also in-person experiences in the future. To this end, your engagement, your participation, and your feedback are vital to us. We're really interested in learning how the course and content can be improved. So please, we're enlisting your engagement, not only through learning, but also in helping us to improve the training, the content, and the process today.
Yes, and I'd just like to underscore that and say we really do believe in the wisdom of crowds, especially this crowd. So help us learn more about what the professions need by telling us what you think about the presentation and how we can improve it. So why project management? As I said, it was very early on in our discussions within the CE Coalition that we identified project management as a key issue, a key concern that crosses all our professional boundaries and our institutional boundaries, what we all need to know. We all need to know about project management. And there are a couple of reasons we think for that. The most significant, I think, is related to the fact that all our budgets are changing. Increasingly, we see that institutional budgets are moving from a program base to a project base. And that means that the budgets and work plans are often defined in terms of specific deliverables or outcomes in 1, 2, 3, or more year frameworks. So instead of saying that every year you'll get X amount of funds, and that year, next year, there will be the same amount of funds, and you'll be continuing to do the same things, over and over again. Increasingly, we're urged to and forced to think about projects, and projects as the framework for what we do on a day-to-day basis. That has many implications. One implication is that we're going to have to start writing grants, or maybe many of us are already starting to write grants. That means there's going to be a competitive review of plans. At the IMLS, we fund maybe 25% of the proposals we receive. So we're looking at project plans and determining which are more competitive. We're very interested in technology, and technology, as we all know, is dynamic. We can't control the changes in the technology we use. So that's out of our control. But we can prepare for those changes, and plans are the way we prepare for them. Partners. None of us have all the resources we need, especially to manage new technologies. Our reach, as the saying goes, generally exceeds our grasp. So we have to collaborate. We have to find partners who can supply resources that we don't have. And that means ongoing partnerships, and that means plans. We need to have plans so that there are clear and mutually agreed upon expectations and defined responsibilities for the partnerships to work. Measuring performance. Along with that reference to budget cuts, increasingly we have to demonstrate outcomes to justify our budgets, to protect our budgets. In some cases these days, we have to justify the continued existence of our programs. So we need to show our impact, the benefits of what we do, in understandable and measurable terms. Again, we need plans to do that. This measurement happens over time. You can't leave it to chance. You can't leave it to the last minute. Last, we have to deliver outcomes. We have to realize our promises. We have to act on our plans and show that what we meant to do, we did. So all of these are reasons that we thought project management is a critical concern for all professions.
So after today's webinar, we hope you've been provided with a basic introduction to project planning. The information we collected during your registrations reflected that for many of you, you'd rate your project management knowledge as limited. Hopefully after today, you feel a little bit more comfortable with the basics of planning a project. Since we only have an hour with you, we will be focusing on the planning process itself, determining what your project will be, who you will impact, and what your outcomes and benchmarks are. For those of you who are interested, we will also provide you with resources so you can gain more information on the actual management and implementation of project activities. Throughout the webinar, we want to stress the importance of being iterative and flexible in project planning. Being able to evaluate your project on an ongoing basis and adjust or course correct throughout its life cycle is pretty much essential to its success. And regardless of your experience today with project management, we hopefully you will gain a better understanding for where your current knowledge and skill level actually is. It might reinforce some lessons you've already learned or help you identify and begin to fill some holes in your project management knowledge.
So for today's agenda, we've planned this as a sequence of activities, partly to make it more than just a lecture over the web, partly to account for the possibility that, as Sarah mentioned earlier, that we could deliver this presentation and the content through different means, say, for example, in face-to-face workshops. So the plan for us is today we will start with this webinar. Sarah and I introduce the elements of a project plan. We'll, along the way, describe some worksheets that we'll ask you to do. Those are available on the Coalition website and also on this site. You can see them listed on the top of the slide as articulating T and audiences and. In the next week or so, we urge you to get together or work on your own and complete those worksheets and send them to us. We'll review them and use them to help refine a second webinar scheduled for the 19th. At that point, we'll be using your input, what you provided through chat, what you may have provided through Twitter, what you may have emailed to us, and as well your worksheets. And we'll take all that and we'll use that to talk about some case studies, some exemplary ideas and worksheets that we can use to talk about how to develop a project plan. We will go over what all we've learned from you and in the course of the second webinar, provide for a lot more Q&A and get your feedback on the presentations, the webinar content itself. Now, volume and time permitting, I'm sorry, I just see a note from Jennifer that you can't get to the worksheets in WebEx, but I can show them to you as we get farther along down the line. So they are available and will be available on the Project Coalition website. If you can't find them, email us and we'll send them to you directly. But as I was saying, volume and time permitting, IMLS staff and coalition partners will look at all of the worksheets and respond to them, giving you the comments and suggestions that could help you develop your plan, or if you prefer, develop and write a grant proposal. So we will look forward to receiving your worksheets. We'll talk a little bit more about those later, but we'll definitely find the time to comment on and review them.
So now that we've pretty much overly communicated our plans for today and the future, the first thing we'll be talking about in terms of content today is communication. Communicating your vision and your ideas and your plan is one of the most important pieces of project management from the beginning. You must be able to articulate your vision in a persuasive manner in order to garner support from partners, from funders, and from your institution itself. You want to think carefully through the questions that are listed here. They can help you to begin to clarify your plan and address the types of questions you're likely to get from your institution and your audience. You want to be fully prepared to speak eloquently and confidently on what it is you hope to achieve, and you first need to clarify your own vision before you're able to do so. A clear project mission statement should evolve from careful consideration of these and other questions. At the IMLS, for example, proposals that are able to efficiently and clearly state what it is the institution is trying to do and what the outcomes may be are viewed more favorably by our reviewers. These are the proposals that stand out to us. Furthermore, even when these proposals aren't funded, the feedback from reviewers will be much more useful and specific if a plan is communicated clearly from the beginning. We'd like to take this opportunity to use our chat box. So we'd love to know from you if you have specific communication strategies that you've found helpful, or if there are other questions that you think that should be considered when doing project management. Or if you even have some examples of communication challenges that you've faced. Please feel free to use the chat box and Twitter to communicate with each other about those, and we'll look at them later.
Sorry, I went too fast. So here is an example, and this comes from an IMLS application, so it's a real-life example, and I'll just go ahead and read it. The applicant, in collaboration with 4 regional museums, will create and implement software to enable museums to contribute digital image collections for open public access. So this is very concise and clear. It identifies partners, the product, content, and outcome. And each has a whole variety of implications that allow someone, like a reviewer or a funder, to project the value and, to an extent, the challenges of the idea. For example, the reference to regional partners. From our perspective as a funding agency, broad impact is definitely a plus. The more people, the more institutions that are affected or engaged in or will be influenced or informed by a project, the more competitive it is. There is some difficulty there, and we'll talk about what it means to have some partnerships and the challenges that follow. But in general, broad impact is a very good thing. There's a difficulty identified there. There's the intent to create and implement software. As we know, very often from our own experience, certainly from any of our dealings with software itself, software development is never easy. And so when we start to think about fulfilling a plan with software development as a key element to it, you're going to have to be very conscious of capacity and resources. Look at those issues very, very closely. And then the plan identifies the deliverables, digital content, always useful, but we'll be interested in hearing about standards. And we are reassured by those important qualifiers, open in public, making things readily available, freely available for the general public to use. That promises a tremendous benefit in innovation.
Along with communication, being able to define and understand your audience is absolutely critical when planning a project. You have to be aware that the general public is not an audience. A plan should actually identify a targeted population that you hope to help or serve in order to maximize your impact. You should be able to ask yourself who will participate in, use, and/or benefit from the project that you are planning. In shaping and managing a project, identifying the needs, resources, constraints, skills, and interests of a target group will enable you to better meet the population's needs, adjust to project successes and failures, and garner support from the community. Furthermore, understanding the resources currently available to a population and their specific challenges in terms of skills, education, or access will help you to form a more realistic and effective plan, which I cannot stress enough. You need to be able to identify where your audience is actually starting at and what they're actually interested in and be able to build from there. If you're creating an online course for a population that struggles with broadband access, for example, it's not going to be a successful plan. You should consider your institution's existing relationship with the target audience as well. It may become clear, for example, that you need to partner with a local community organization or form other bridges that open lines of communication and outreach with the target community.
And thank you for the examples on chat. This is very helpful, and I hope we address some of those directly along the way. If not, do remind us, and we will come back to them. But I think one theme that I see is that communication is, to a certain extent, being perceived or presented as translation. How do we take an idea we have and put it in a framework that somebody else understands? And so here's an example that I think might show the implications of that. Again, this is a real life from a proposal to the IMLS. The two core public audiences for this effort are first and second generation immigrants and the millennial generation. The notion that engaging these populations with the city's past can deepen their civic connections in the present is inspired by findings that building community histories that encourage community attachment is an area where libraries can provide effective leadership. And I think this outlines the sort of details that Sarah was mentioning, and then the ideas and references that you all were mentioning in chat. We know what questions to ask about this proposal, this plan now. For example, there are two very different audiences there. First and second generation immigrants and the millennial generation. There's a difference in their capacities. There's probably a difference in their interests. So to a certain extent, you're looking at how you're going to be able to define the pathways to reach those different audiences, what actually is going to have to be in place. There's also the question is, what do they think community is? They may have very different ideas of communities, and then consequently very different idea of histories. And there's a lot to unpack there, a lot that would have to be explained for us to understand how this would particularly work with two such different audiences. The last thing I would mention is that reference to libraries, where libraries can provide effective leaderships. That's really a third audience. The assumption there, or perhaps the implication, I would say, is that librarians are going to follow this project and learn from it as a model. And that means a communication effort above and beyond with whatever they're doing to the two primary audiences of immigrants and millennials. Claiming to create a model is always a very tricky business. At the IMLS, we see lots of proposals that say we're going to create a model. To be honest, we don't see many followers when we're doing the evaluations and the postmortems. Creating something and then getting others to use it are often two very, very different things. So a good plan is going to have to address this.
So once you have a clearer understanding of what it is you actually want to do and who you are planning on serving, you want to do an environmental scan. It's actually crucial to have a thorough understanding of what's been done before you so you aren't reinventing the wheel, so to speak. Performing an environmental scan will enable you to build off existing ideas, technologies, or strategies, and to learn from the work and mistakes of or successes of others who have done this work before you. Existing models or standards can serve as an excellent resource for furthering your own ideas or eliminating duplicate efforts. They may even help you to go in a new direction. Similarly, understanding what is already available in terms of technology, for example, will also help you to shape your ideas more fluently. It's worth noting that this is not to say you have to actually adopt the models, best practices, or technologies that are already available in the field. You merely want to have a working understanding of what is available so you can justify your choices. If you choose not to follow existing best practices, for example, you should be able to clearly communicate why that is. As another example, you could decide an available open source platform doesn't fit your needs, and you will need to contract a custom option. But you first should be able to demonstrate that you've already investigated your existing options and decided that they won't work for you. And this actually addresses something that's being mentioned in chat about communication and talking to administration, and something that will help to get their buy-in. When you've answered all the questions above, you're actually also demonstrating that your institution has the capacity to do this and further supporting your case to your administration as well as your potential funders or partners.
Resources. As my old boss at the Minnesota Historical Society used to say, this is where the rubber hits the road. The difference between a good idea and a good project is funding. You have to look at a variety of different options. You may have the capacity in the house to do all that you need. You probably don't. Again, what we see is a lot of budget cuts these days. At the very same time, our costs are rising, and even more important, the expectations of our users are changing and becoming more demanding. I'll use an example from, again, my previous life. I was once at a meeting talking about digital records, and someone was talking about an experience she had. She said she went to this repository, she was in a room, she looked at all these notebooks filled with lists of boxes, she wrote out a form, she sent it into a desk and waited, and finally a box full of stuff came to her, and she said, it was just like, and I said, it was just like an archives. And she said, yes, that's right. And her experience and her expectations were that material should be digitized and online, searchable, useful in a variety of ways with a variety of different programs. So we are increasingly, in all of our professions, facing that sort of expectation, and we need to adapt. And again, the idea that we can do it all on our own is probably not realistic. So you're looking outside of your institution for funding. You're probably going to look at a mix of funding sources. You may have to do something from your own budget, and that means invariably making some choices, setting some priorities. You might have to stop doing something in order to do something else. You're probably going to want to write a grant proposal, and very often that means taking your square peg and fitting it into some funder's round hole. That is, grant programs generally want specific things. We define at the IMLS priorities and the sorts of activities we want to fund. Those may not be the same as what you'd like. And sadly, guess which has the priority? Unfortunately, we have to look for the things that more closely fit our needs. Revenue is often invoked. It's kind of like a holy grail, often sought, never found. The capacity to generate revenue that we've seen in a lot of our projects is very, very limited. I urge you to consider it, but be realistic about it. All of this activity, all of this work is going to help you define the scope and scale of your project, what you realistically can hope to build on the funding resources that you have. You boil all that down to actual costs and put those together in a budget. That forms the foundation of your plan.
So institutional capacity not only refers to your funding, it also refers to your staffing needs and the skills that you have available. No institution is actually going to have all the necessary skills in-house to bring a project to fruition. It will be important for you to identify what skills and expertise you will need for your project. Evaluate your existing staff skills and capacity, as well as their time, and do the necessary training, hiring, contracting, and collaborating to bring the right people to the table. This process is going to have to be built into your timeline. It takes a lot of time to do this type of stuff, especially if you're going to have contracts. Particularly in regards to technology, you want to pay special attention to what expertise or skill sets will be needed and take the necessary steps to obtain these skills. These relationships also need to be quid pro quo. You will need to take into consideration how your partners will also benefit from lending their skills and expertise to the project and what their motivations are. You can't actually expect people to work for free.
And the other phrase that comes to mind when Sarah mentions quid pro quo is from Jean-Paul Sartre, is hell with other people. Partnerships aren't necessarily easy. And we often have, I think, the inclination to form rather informal agreements with friends, people we know, people whom we can rely upon. Very often, though, and we see this all the time in projects, those friends move on. They get other jobs. And you find yourself in a relationship, a collaboration with people who are new, who have other priorities, maybe other assumptions, and maybe other sets of expectations. An informal agreement is not the right foundation for that sort of work. If you're relying on other people, you really need to consider how to define roles and responsibilities.
Yeah, it's important that you are making sure that your partnerships are institutional relationships and not personal relationships. And we'd also like to take this opportunity to use our chat again, which thank you to everyone who's been participating in the box. It's been very lively. So we'd also like to ask if anyone has had any successful strategies for finding partners or any actual horror stories with working with partners. You should feel free to talk to each other and write them in the chat box, and we'll use those for developing our further content.
So we look forward to seeing that. And this is happening faster than we can read it.
Don't name names.
So now you can put it all together. You can look at the practical work plan as an assemblage of all of these elements. A couple of things you need to keep in mind. Never underestimate the preparation time. Oh, I see one reference I can answer. Who is the person referenced behind the hell with people, not hell with people, hell is other people, and it was from Jean-Paul Sartre, his play No Exit. So putting it all together, don't underestimate the preparation time. We see this over and over again as one of the great problems that our grantees encounter. Partners often mean contracts. We mentioned the need to have formal agreements. If those become contractual, then you're looking at lawyers, you're looking at rules, you're looking at their lawyers, you're looking at your lawyers, their rules, our rules, and it becomes a time-consuming business. Very often, if it's a contract, you have to put out a request for proposals in most organizations, and certainly most government organizations. That's also a process with all that word implies. It takes time. And you can certainly make sure that in those contracts, again, you're starting to define expectations and set milestones. Again, you can't control everything that's going to happen. You can prepare for all the changes and unexpected developments by defining certain points in a contract when you can make a decision of whether to move forward or to end the agreement. Some things don't work out, and we very often see in technology agreements that are kind of broadly written with no milestones, people are anchored to their vendor and somehow cannot get out of a project even though it's not working the way you want it to. So keep that in mind. Preparation time is very, very important. Technology is kind of the other great bugaboo here. As we noted, it's dynamic, it changes, and it changes completely outside of our control. But even if you can't control it, you can prepare for it. A couple of things to keep in mind. You want to have an iterative plan, something that allows for prototyping, something that allows for testing, feedback, change, and improvement that allows you to enhance the value and evaluate the value of what you're developing. So iteration rather than a single straightforward sequence of events. You also want to allow for a modular architecture. If you do find things that are working better, if you do find ways to improve what you're doing, you want to be able to plug it in, maybe pull something out. And you can't do that if you're looking at a project that is one single piece. So some modular architecture or service-oriented architecture, there are various ways to define it. Microservices is a term I've also seen used that allows you to adopt the best of breed for particular functions and activities. If you're developing a product or a service or creating a model, you're going to need to invest in communication. We mentioned the fact that we see more models than we do followers. One reason is that the people creating the models don't often invest enough in the outreach and marketing necessary to make something useful. People have to know about your product. They have to learn how to use it. In some cases, they have to be persuaded to stop using one thing and adopt your product instead. All of that demands some very sophisticated communication strategies, and it cannot wait until the end of the project. You have to plan for it all through the effort if you want to demonstrate impact, if you want to reach the people you want to meet. In that plan, probably something that I hope you've heard of, but is valuable to know about, is the term critical path. You have to understand the contingencies in your plan. As we've been stressing, I hope compellingly, there are inevitably going to be changes in your project. Something may have to be dropped, budgets could shrink, maybe rise, who knows, we do have lotteries. People will leave their jobs, partners are going to have second thoughts. As I've seen in the chat box, administrations can change and leave you high and dry. The critical path in a project plan allows you to understand how the dominoes will fall, what has to be done when to make other parts of the project possible.
And we had actually one question that I think that it'd be important to address right now, which is what's an example of modular architecture? This not only refers to technology, although that's certainly something that's very, very important. Modular architecture also just refers to your project in general, which is what Bob means by understanding what your critical path is. If your project is modular, then you're able to decide how you need to adjust or what components you can drop and how you can react to changes in leadership, changes in funding, changes in staffing, basically life, which we all know is going to happen.
Yeah. And I see there's some great answers as well that will supplement and complement what Sarah is saying. There's one about task groups as modular and software development, separating functions. This is all right, spot on. So thank you very much, and we'll I hope that we see more of this in your worksheets, and we can talk about more in our next webinar.
So now on to everyone's favorite topic, evaluation. Don't wait. Evaluation is very important, especially to your funders. IMLS, for example, is placing an increased emphasis on this component when we're evaluating our proposals. Building an evaluation into every stage of your work plan will enable you to maintain a realistic vision for your project and adjust accordingly to unforeseen issues or challenges. A work plan containing benchmarks and deliverables will enable you to manage the expectations of your institution and your administration, your funders, your partners, and it will also help you in assessing the project, assessing your contractors, and assessing how your technology needs, your staffing needs, and your capacity is increasing or decreasing. Evaluation should begin during the planning process. For example, if you perform a needs assessment, that will enable you to establish a baseline for evaluating the impact of your work going forward from there. You don't want to wait to begin considering how you will evaluate your work. Assessment also takes time and should be properly scoped out in your work plan. Furthermore, it also requires resources. You will need to evaluate if your institution has the capacity, both in terms of finances and staffing, to evaluate effectively. It might be pertinent for you to hire an outside evaluator, in which case, as we mentioned earlier, this will need to be incorporated into your timeline and planning process because contracts take work. Depending on your project, quantitative or qualitative evaluation will be necessary. Either approach can be justified, so you should think carefully about your expected outcomes and how these can best be measured. Many projects we've seen will require a mix of quantitative and qualitative evaluation strategies to assess the success of the project and demonstrate the impact of it effectively. Finally, your work plan should be practical and contain feasible outcomes. You don't need to be, as we like to call it, cosmic in your proposal. That's to say that many of the more successful proposals that IMLS sees are ones where the outcomes are within scope. Reviewers are quick to note when proposals are not actually feasible. For example, a proposal that's promising to launch the entire field forward by a decade on a shoestring budget is not actually going to be successful because it's unrealistic.
I see one reference in the chat box to sound being stopped. I'm hoping that that's just, I'm sorry if it's one person, but let us know if there's any problem generally with the sound.
You're doing good. We'll address their needs. Thanks.
Great, thank you, thank you. So here's one aspect of a project plan that is generally among the weakest in any of the proposals that we see at the IMLS. Sustainability, what comes next? You really have to think about what comes next. There are some very few cases when people have a project that creates a discrete product and is done. There's nothing that comes out, nothing needs to be followed up. Much more often, your project is going to have a tail, a variety of things that you need to do after the project ends, very often after the project funding ends. And this is a critical concern of funders, certainly a critical concern at the IMLS. We don't want to see our investment go to waste. And we understand that the return on our investment usually comes after the project's end, when the product and services are developed and made available on a wide basis. So we want to know what's going to come next, what happens at the end of the 2 or 3 year period. Some things you might consider. Are you going to have to devote continuing support from your program to sustain a project? That could mean some hard choices. In project proposals that we see at the grant application stage, that's very often something we can evaluate in terms of the match. What resources you contribute to a grant is sometimes a good indication of what flexibility you have for sustainability, what you're devoting on a current project in order to be able to sustain it after the, excuse me, after the funding runs out from the grant. Technology, as we've said very often, technology is going to change. So how are you going to deal with the maintenance and upgrades? What are you going to do to refresh your product? How are you going to deal with the needs for new hardware and software? Is that going to be easier or hard? Obviously, if you're preparing for change, if you're using open sources, non-proprietary applications, etc., things may be a little easier. But you need to address that in a plan. There's also often an issue about further development. Often if you're dealing with some sort of digital site, it's a question of adding new content. And that could mean more digitization. If you're digitizing photographs or creating images, it could mean more lesson plans if you're in some kind of educational project. It could mean just more contact and engagement with your audience, keeping up that communication that you started in the course of the project itself. You don't want to be in a situation where you've just abandoned a group you've enlisted at great expense and time, and to say, I'm sorry, we're done, we really can't continue to talk to you. I mean, you can do that, but it's generally not a very good idea. So you have to think about how you're going to keep people involved, how are you going to meet their expectations for engagement, and how are you going to continue communicating with them. Social media is often a big part of that, and if so, you're going to want to plan for it. Last, I'll mention, and it's something that's bedeviled the professions for many years now, is the question of digital preservation. There are not always some good answers. You have a lot of options, but increasingly, if you're creating digital content, the expectation from funding sources is that you're making a plan to keep it alive, often for secondary use over a long period of time. So you'll need to consider how you're going to do that and make sure that you have the resources and capacity or partners to do it.
And there is some talk in the chat box about finding administrative buy-in so that your projects aren't actually one and done but can live on past the grant cycle or the funding cycle. I think one thing to stress is what Bob was saying about not abandoning your audience. Your institutional reputation is actually tied into how successful and sustainable your projects are in the long term. You've spent time building trust with the community, and you're going to abandon them. That's gonna hurt your institutional reputation. In addition, with funders, they do notice if previous projects have just disappeared off the map. So that's something to keep in mind when discussing your budgets and your capacity with your administrators. Oh, this is me. So now that we've gone over the content, it's time for you all to do some homework, which you've already started doing in the chat box, which is great. Our plan for the next session is to spend some time actually communicating with you a little bit more. So what we'd like you to do is, using the worksheets that we'll go over in a minute, we'd like you on your own or in some small groups, preferably in small groups because there are, around 700 attendees on this webinar, and Bob and I don't have 700 hours in a week. We'd like you to match up with colleagues, with neighbors, perhaps through the chat box or Twitter. You can make some cross-sector collaborations happen. And form small groups where you're going to actually work on developing a succinct idea and defining an imaginary audience. After you've completed the worksheet, you will submit that to our webinar team for review at lam@imls.gov. I will be on the other end of that. Bob and I and our colleagues will actually review the worksheets and hopefully be able to provide you with feedback depending on our staffing capacities here at IMLS. And then on the 19th, we'll reconvene to discuss what we've learned from all of you and some of the great ideas that you all have come up with.
And this is a good example of a plan that perhaps isn't managing expectations all that well, because we plan to respond to everyone who sends us a worksheet, but we're recognizing that the volume is somewhat daunting. So bear with us. We may not get to you right away, but we'll get to you eventually. So here's some definitions of the worksheet. We have two of these: articulating the idea and identifying audiences and constituencies. I'm going to try to show you one right now. Does that work? There we go. So these are available on the Coalition website, and I believe we certainly can send them to you, and I believe Jennifer has posted a URL where you can get them as well. But essentially what we're asking you to do is fill out the worksheet in a very succinct way. These are Word documents, so there's no limit to what you can provide, but we do ask you to try to be succinct because that helps you to clarify and focus your ideas. We ask a certain number of questions, and I'll go to the audiences, and we identify the fact that you're going to have a primary audience. You may have constituencies that are internal and external. So that is something that we've accounted for. We're asking you to address those possibilities or those elements and variables in your in your completion of these. So for articulating the idea, it can be a blue sky idea. You can think of whatever you want, but we do ask you to be succinct. We're very much interested in a description of your purpose and impact. Impact, we've often found in our review panels, is probably one of the most important criteria that separates a good proposal from I should say, well, makes a good proposal fundable. Your impact and your ability to define and articulate your impact is critically important to funding. And define your products. Don't take a lot of time, but just give us an idea of what your idea is and what some of the results are going to be. It's critical as well that you go to the second worksheet and start to identify the audiences and constituencies. Just define them. This takes your idea from the hypothetical, boy, wouldn't it be wonderful stage, into some kind of tangible real world. Who are the people? Why would they want this? Is there any evidence that there really is a need for this from their perspective? Are they going to have resources or capacity issues to address? Do you have to provide anything in order for them to be engaged? And why, if you're talking about constituencies and partners, especially internal ones, why would they want to work with you? I mean, we're all in organizations where everybody has enormous amounts of things to do, probably more than we'll ever be able to complete successfully given how our budgets are changing. So you're basically asking people to give up one thing in order to do another. How do you make that attractive? How do you make that compelling? How do you put it in terms that they're going to understand? And those are, I think, the critical aspects of the worksheets that we look forward to seeing.
And it's actually really fantastic to see all of you trying to connect over the chat. Just to stress again, we really do hope that you all get together in groups. It's great practice for you in terms of your communication skills and actually being able to clarify a cohesive idea as a group. And hopefully there's also a little bit of cross-sector collaboration and idea exchange happening as well.
Yeah, that'd be fabulous. Very often an idea that I say to myself on the bus ride to work, it sounds incredible. When I mention it to Sarah, I get a dose of cold reality. So here are our contacts and resources. If you just follow these, and again, this should be a downloadable presentation so that you don't need to copy these from the screen. To submit the worksheets, email them to us at lam@imls.gov. If you want to contact either of us individually with a question or a concern, our email addresses are there. The website URL for coalitiontoadvancedlearning.org is where you can find a lot of resources about the presentation and other things. And our Twitter handle is LAM Coalition. So we're interested in all of those ways of communicating with you. We look forward to receiving whole bunches of worksheets. And I think now we have a situation where we've got one slide where Sharon is going to talk about evaluation, and then for our remaining time, Jennifer is going to direct us to some particular questions we can try to answer from the chat box. Is that correct, my colleagues? Jennifer?
Sure. I can just mention, I think Sharon's going to work with you on the questions, but I can mention that when you leave the session today, the Coalition has created a survey to collect your feedback that will both be helpful as Bob and Sarah develop content for their second session, as well as just overall input on doing this across all of these sectors that you come from. And I just want to point out that if you are not registered for the February 19th session and you're able to attend, please do so, and I'll be sure and post that link in the chat, but it's the same program link that we've been using for registration. But I just want to be sure that if you intend to come and you are not registered, that you have that information. And if you do have questions specifically about registration, you can contact me at petersodge@oclc.org. Otherwise, I know Sharon's been collecting questions for you all, so we'll pass it back over to her.
Thanks, Jennifer. Oops, it just changed the slide on me. So, and just to reiterate with that survey is we encourage everybody to fill out the evaluation survey about today's session. For those of you, and hopefully that's all of you, who will be attending the second session on February 19th, you will receive another survey after that session. So your comments can just be, today can be associated with today's session. And, you know, there weren't, I would say, a whole lot of questions in the chat. There was such a rich conversation, but I thought I would just kind of bring a couple things up that might have bearing on your homework assignment, and then maybe that Bob and Sarah can elaborate on well. And one, there was a lot of talk about the use of jargon, and that came with that first section about communication and being clear about how you can find ways to talk about what you're trying to do if you're talking to multiple partners, multiple stakeholders, and also just words that you might not think are jargon but actually are. And there was a great example of the use of the word community that was raised, and being aware that community can mean a very different thing depending on who your audience is. And then maybe another area was around the area of the issue. A lot of people talked about the issue that they had with partnerships is when a key expertise leaves the project, usually for very unforeseen reasons. People talked about, you know, them passing away, for example, and then that expertise is not replaced. And so I think somebody very succinctly said there's a difference between institutional commitment and specific people commitment. And so I wondered if Bob and Sarah have any additional comments on either of those 2 points.
So I don't think we have anything in particular to add. We were very impressed, and we went to follow what was in the chat box. We couldn't catch it all as we were speaking, so we'll study that. We certainly look forward to all the worksheets, and we are incredibly grateful for everybody's patience and contributions.
And we're also really excited for your evaluations and your feedback. This really is a work in progress for us as well, and it's taking a little bit of our project management skills and putting them to the test. So hopefully you all will fill out the survey and help us evaluate our own performance and the content.
Great, thank you. So I see one question from Jennifer. It says, please address the deadline for submitting the worksheets. We'll probably, ideally, if we get them in the next week or so, that'll give us time to review them. As again, the next webinar is going to be on the 19th, and we'll need several days, I think, to prepare that, prepare the slides, prepare the presentations. So in an ideal world, we get these in about a week, the end of next week, and that will allow us time to synthesize, review, and comment on them. A lot of the commentary initially is going to come in the course of the second webinar. We will then do our best to follow up afterwards very quickly with comments on specific worksheet, the worksheets that you send us. So we hope to address everything. We may not be able to address everything right away, but we'll get to it. And any other questions or concerns? We're pretty much at the close of our hour.
Maybe we'll keep the window open for a few more minutes for those of you who are making connections right now, but otherwise we're done.
Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing your worksheets. We certainly look forward to talking to you again on the 19th, and please let us know if there's anything we can add or do. We're extremely grateful for your patience and participation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent, and thank you so much to Bob and Sarah for your excellent work on this session, and we very much look forward to the next session and to your review of everyone's worksheets. I encourage people to think of the best way to name your worksheets and save them in a way that Bob and Sarah can track them. Any of your expert skills in that area for project management will be appreciated by them, I'm sure. All right, well, excellent, and thank you all again, and we'll talk to you in a couple weeks, and we'll sign off. Thank you.